imagine a world where, well, your whole future after your teens was pretty much set by just one thing: marriage.
Mm,
For women in classical Athens, that wasn't just a possibility, it was basically their destiny.
it really was.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today on the deep dive, we're diving into the lives of Athenian women, really focusing on marriage customs. It's fascinating, sometimes surprising stuff.
Absolutely. We'll be drawing a lot from Sue Blundell's work on women in ancient Greece.
Right, Las Mujeres de la Antigua Grecia. And this isn't just about dates and facts, is it? It's about understanding a whole foundational structure of their society.
Exactly. We often think of Athens and jump straight to philosophy, democracy.
Yeah, the big names, the big ideas.
But for roughly half the people there, life really revolves so intensely around this one single institution, marriage.
That really hits home how vital it is to look at the whole picture, right?
Definitely. And this deep dive, I think it promises some genuinely eye-opening things about Athens that might challenge how you first think about it.
Absolutely. Now, we know you're busy. You want to soak up knowledge efficiently. So our goal today is to cut through the noise, give you a clear, insightful look at this absolutely pivotal part of Athenian life.
We're digging into historical analysis here.
And the mission is pretty straightforward. By understand just how central marriage was in shaping the lives, the destinies, really, of Athenian women.
So where do we start?
Well, maybe with just how inescapable it was.
That's the key first step, yeah. Just grasping how totally all-encompassing marriage was for an Athenian woman.
Unlike for men.
Right. Men had public life, philosophy, military service, you name it. But for women, marriage was the marker of adulthood.
That was their main role then, wife and mother.
Pretty much their primary identity. Their world was largely the gynesio, the women's quarters in the house, almost a separate sphere.
The Geneseo.
Yeah, and we even have artifacts like, that 5th century BC terracotta pyxis from Athens.
Oh, the one for jewelry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Likely for a bride's jewelry. It speaks volumes about that intimate domestic world that was so central to their lives.
It sounds like a very contained world.
Mm-hmm.
And what if a woman didn't get married? What was the alternative?
Well, it wasn't really a viable alternative, honestly. Remaining unmarried had some really serious downsides.
Economically.
Yeah, economically, she was almost completely dependent on male relatives. Without a husband, there was a real risk of poverty, even prostitution.
Gosh.
And it's quite telling, contemporary literature, it hardly ever mentions unmarried women.
So they were just invisible, marginalized.
It certainly seems their social standing was incredibly marginal. They just didn't hold the same kind of status as married women.
So for women, it wasn't if they'd marry, but when. And the timing sounds different from today.
Oh, significantly different. Athenian girls usually married quite young. We're talking between 14 and 18.
14, wow.
Yeah, Xenophon mentions a 14-year-old bride. Demosthenes' sister married after 18, so there was some range, but still very young.
And the men?
Men were typically much older, usually around 30 when they first married.
30, that's a huge age gap.
It is. And that gap wasn't just about years, It fundamentally shaped the power dynamic right from the start. The younger woman was automatically in a subordinate position.
Yeah, you can see how it highlights the societal priority on, control, hierarchy.
Exactly. Control and established hierarchy.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? Young girls marrying men who are already well into their adult lives. Now, they didn't just suddenly get married off, right? There must have been preparation, rituals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The rites performed at Braran, at the sanctuary of Artemis, are really fascinating here.
Braran.
Yeah. Young girls, maybe 5 to 10 years old, served the goddess Artemis. They were called arktoi.
Arktoi, what does that mean?
It means bears.
Bears, little girl bears.
Kind of. They wore distinctive yellow robes, they did ritual races, and performed these, they called them bear dances.
Bear dances, that's such a vivid image.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
We even have a little 4th century BC statuette from the Braran Museum that probably shows one of these arktois.
So what was the point of all this? The bear dances, the yellow robes?
Well, scholars have a few ideas. Some think it was a kind of symbolic expiation.
Expiation for what?
Maybe related to starting menstruation or the symbolic loss of virginity. Like they were symbolically atoning before becoming women.
Interesting.
Others see it more as preparation for that transition, leaving childhood behind, entering the adult female world.
And the races. You mentioned races.
Yeah, the races, and sometimes older girls participated nude. That's often interpreted as a sign of nearing marriage. And shedding those yellow robes was like shedding their old identity.
So these weren't just like quaint customs. They were deeply tied into getting ready for marriage and womanhood.
Deeply woven into the societal fabric, yeah. It really shows how central marriage was, shaping lives from a very young age.
Okay, so when these young women did marry, what was the main driver? Was it love? Companionship?
That's a crucial point for us to understand. Athenian marriage, primarily, it wasn't about romantic love as we think of it.
No, then what?
It was really about social structure, about making sure property passed down correctly within families, about ensuring the state continued.
Property and the state.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the preference for very young brides. It wasn't just about having kids, though that was important. It was also seen as easier to, well, to dominate them.
Dominate.
Yeah, and integrate them into the husband's household after puberty. There was this belief, you see, that young women became wild and ungovernable around that age.
Wild and ungovernable. That's quite a view of teenager.
It is, and it helps explain the huge emphasis on premarital virginity and why the father had absolute say in arranging the marriage.
So the father decided everything.
Pretty much always arranged by the father, sometimes even before the girl was born.
Wow.
And the husband often wanted a young wife specifically so he could train her, mold her, and household management exactly how he liked.
And legally, the woman had no say.
Legally. Absolutely zero capacity to arrange her own marriage. It was all down to her father or another male guardian, her Kyrios.
Even if she hated the idea or had someone else in mind.
Well, there's a tiny bit of evidence women might express opinions, like Isaiah mentions a sister's hand being granted after the men agreed. But the final decision, always the men.
Right.
Even with divorce and remarriage, like the story of Menicius, the woman's choice in her next husband seems really limited.
So who were these husbands? Usually strangers.
Not always. Actually, marriage between relatives was quite common.
Relatives, like cousins.
Yeah, first cousins, sometimes uncles and nieces, even half-siblings with the same father.
Why? To keep wealth in the family.
Exactly. Keep the family wealth and property consolidated. If there wasn't a suitable relative, maybe a close family friend.
And if they married someone outside the family?
Then the dowry, the pra, became super important. That was the bride's family's financial contribution to setting up the new household.
Okay, so it's this whole complex web. Social, economic, not just about two people.
Far from it. It was about the family's continuity, its status, and even the state itself.
Right. Speaking of the state, women played a key role there, didn't they? Even with limited rights.
Absolutely vital role. The wife's main job was producing legitimate heirs for her father's line and providing kids for her husband's lineage.
And that became even more important after a certain law, right? Pericles' law.
Exactly. Pericles' citizenship law, mid-5th century BC, later reaffirmed. It said you needed Athenian parents on both sides to be a citizen.
Both sides. So suddenly women were the only way to pass on citizenship.
Precisely.
Yep.
Even though they didn't have full political rights themselves, they became the gatekeepers of Athenian citizenship.
That's such a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Essential for defining who's Athenian, but not fully participating citizens themselves.
It's a fascinating paradox, yeah. It reveals a lot about the complex, sometimes contradictory nature of Athens.
Why did they pass that law? Any idea?
Well, historians debate it. Some think it was to curb the power of aristocrats who married foreigners to build alliances. Others argue it was about creating a more exclusive, privileged citizen body within Athens.
Makes sense.
Whatever the reason, it definitely encouraged marriage within Athenian society and endogamy. This exchange of women among citizens built up these huge kinship networks.
Strengthening the state from within.
Exactly, weaving the social and political fabric tighter.
So again, marriage wasn't really about personal happiness. It was about the state's survival, its stability.
Very much so. That utilitarian view comes through loud and clear. Think about the trial against Nera, the courtesan accused of illegally marrying a citizen around 340 BC.
Right.
There's a text, maybe by Demosthenes, where Apollodorus basically says, Heterai are for pleasure, concubines for daily care, but wives. Wives are for legitimate kids and guarding the house.
Wow, spelled out just like that.
Pretty much. Though we do get glimpses of more personal life through art, like that Pyxis showing women dressing, or funerary stelae showing couples together, like Setsalao and Theano. A reminder of the human bonds, even within this system.
And within these marriages, the expectations for husbands and wives were unequal, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, a significant double standard. Wives, absolute fidelity expected. Husbands, they had considerable freedom with slaves, concubines, heterae.
But adultery with another citizen's wife was different.
Yes, that was serious, punishable, because it messed with the clear lines of lineage and the integrity of citizen families. A husband could have other partners, but his wife's fidelity was paramount for the social order.
Paramount, right. Now, you mentioned a specific case earlier, the epikleros. That sounded unique.
Ah, yes, the epikleros. This was a woman with no living brothers, an heiress, basically.
So she inherited the family property?
Not directly. She was the conduit for it. She was legally required to marry her nearest male relative.
Her nearest male relative, even if she didn't want to, or he was already married.
Yes. The whole point was to produce a male heir who would inherit her father's estate, the oikos, and keep it within the patrilineal line.
So the husband just managed the property.
He had the use of it, the use of fruit rights, during their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But it was ultimately about ensuring the oikos continued its property, its religious duties, its social standing. The oikos was fundamental.
That sounds like it could create some awkward situations.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You could have very young girls forced to marry much older relatives.
Yeah.
And if the epikleros was already married when her father died without sons, her father could actually disinherit her unless her husband had adopted her as heir or they had a son.
God.
Like a designated relative, he might have to divorce his current wife or give up other marriage plans to marry the epikleros. It was an obligation.
An obligation. The whole system was just geared towards keeping that oikos going.
Meticulously so. They even regulated sex. The husband was supposed to sleep with the epikleros at least 3 times a month.
Seriously, 3 times a month, mandated.
Yep. And if he didn't, she could actually appeal to his nearest male relative to intervene.
Wow. That's a level of state involvement we don't really see today. It shows how tangled the personal and political were.
Absolutely intertwined.
That funerary steal you mentioned, the one with the young woman choosing jewelry, could that be an epikleros?
It's possible. Some scholars think she might be an epikleros or maybe just a bride, contemplating her future, the weight of her responsibilities, maybe symbolized by the jewelry, the dowry. It's a poignant image.
It really connects you to the human side of these big social structures. Now, we've talked a lot about societal pressure, family duty. Did love or personal feelings ever play a role?
Well, in the main classical period, it seems romantic love wasn't the primary driver. But things might have started shifting a bit later on.
Oh, how so?
As we get into the late 4th, early 3rd century BC, we see playwrights like Menander. He wrote in the style called New Comedy.
New comedy, right?
And in his plays, love often is a central theme, young couples overcoming obstacles to get married. We see depictions of these scenes in museums like the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens.
So like the rom-coms of ancient Greece.
Kinda, yeah. Now, it was a comedic convention for entertainment.
Yeah.
But it does suggest maybe a growing acceptance, or at least acknowledgement, of private feelings, emotional connections in marriage, even if love matches weren't the norm yet. It hints at a slow change in attitude.
Interesting. A little glimmer of romance starting to show up. So, okay, after all the arrangements, the societal weight, maybe a hint of affection, what did the actual wedding look like? Must have been a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely huge. An Athenian marriage wasn't just signing a document. It was a whole process, multiple stages, full of ritual.
Okay, so what was the first step?
The NG. That's often translated as engagement or betrothal. It was a private, verbal contract between the bride's guardian and the groom, or his guardian.
Verbal, but binding.
Yes, and witnesses were crucial. Absolutely essential for the legitimacy of any future children.
Got it. And the dowry, the pro, was part of this.
Typically given then, yes, from the bride's family to the groom. Cash, land, goods. It acknowledged her family's economic stake in the new household.
Could they call it off at this stage?
They could, yeah. The NG could be dissolved before they actually started living together.
Yeah.
As long as the dowry was returned.
So it's a formal deal, big financial stakes. And for the bride herself, this must have been an enormous shift.
Oh, enormous. Symbolically, it was her transition from child to adult, virgin to wife, leaving her father's home for her husband's.
A completely new world.
Exactly. There's a really poignant line, maybe from Euripides, attributed to Procris. She talks about being pushed out and sold away. Really captures that feeling of displacement.
Pushed out and sold away. Wow. So walk us through the wedding day itself. What were the key rituals?
Okay, well, there wasn't one single script, but we can piece together the common elements from different sources. It usually started with preparations. The Bride's father might make a sacrifice, and the bride herself would have a ritual bath, washing her hair, her body.
A purification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Often with water from a sacred spring, carried in a special vase called a latrophoros. It symbolized cleansing, starting fresh.
Electrophoros. I think I've seen those.
You probably have. They show up a lot in art. And sadly, they've even been found in the graves of young women who died before their wedding day. There's one like that in the Met in New York from a 6th century tomb.
Gosh, that's quite somber. Okay, so after the bath.
Then things got more public. Usually a banquet, a feast at the bride's house.
A celebration.
Right. Then, as evening fell, the procession to the groom's house. This is a big moment.
How did that work?
The bride, veiled, would ride in an ox-drawn chariot. The groom would be beside her, maybe with his best friend, his barochos, and there'd be singing, torches lighting the way.
A torchlit procession. Quite dramatic. What happened when they got to the groom's house?
The groom's mother would usually meet them at the door, often holding torches herself. Then the bride was formally led inside, straight to the hearth.
The hearth, at the center of the home.
Exactly, the symbolic heart of her new home. She'd be offered things like sweets, dried fruits, nuts, symbols of fertility, prosperity.
Nice welcoming gestures.
Yeah, and sometimes a young boy wearing a crown of thorns and oak twigs would chant something like, "Flee, flee evil," to ward off bad luck.
A mix of hope and protection, then. What about the consummation?
The groom would lead the bride to the bridal chamber, the thalamos. As they went, the guests would often sing the epithalamium, the traditional wedding song, good wishes, fertility, all that.
Right.
And it's likely her veil came off around then, symbolizing her new status. Maybe later that night or the next morning, a youth chorus might sing another epithalamium.
And then presents.
Yes, the next day was the anacalypteria. Relatives brought gifts for the couple. Jewelry, clothes, mirrors, combs, perfumes, things related to her new domestic role and, well, her sexual identity as a wife.
We see scenes like that on pottery, right?
Definitely. Like that 4th century Pyxis from Athens showing the bride in her chamber with little eros figures and a servant. Or on Alibis Gamikos, a wedding vase like the one in the Met from around 430 BC showing the couple.
So it sounds very public, very ritualized, a community event marking this huge change for the bride.
Very much so. And these weddings didn't happen in a vacuum. They were part of Athens' wider festive life.
Like the Dionysian festivals.
Exactly, like the Linnea.
Yeah.
Festivals where wine flowed, women often had prominent roles in rituals, processions. You see that energy in later art too, like Alma Tadema's Triumphal Bacchus, or on vases showing women in Dionysian processions. It's all part of that cultural tapestry of community and ritual.
Okay, so the wedding day, was it seen mainly as happy, joyful for the bride, or were there other layers to it?
That's where it gets really interesting. Scholars have noticed quite a few parallels between wedding rituals and funeral rituals in ancient Greece.
Funerals? How so?
Things like the purification bath, getting adorned or dressed up, the formal procession, even specific types of hymns or songs used.
Huh. So what's the interpretation?
Some argue that, from the bride's viewpoint, marriage was seen as a kind of symbolic death.
A symbolic death.
Yeah, leaving behind her old life, her identity, and her father's oikos. It echoes myths like Persephone being abducted, taken away to the underworld.
Right, Persephone.
And some of the phrases in wedding songs, like, "Oh, battler, marry us," or the really striking one, "Oh, bride, oh, wretched wife," they can be seen through that lens. Loss, transformation, maybe even sorrow.
Oh, wretched wife. That definitely clashes with our idea of the happiest day of her life.
It really does. And Sue Blundell, the historian we mentioned, is pretty skeptical that happiest day was the common feeling for Athenian brides back then.
A symbolic death. That's powerful. It really underlines the sheer scale of the change and maybe her lack of control over it. Okay, what about the end of marriage? Could people get divorced?
Yes, divorce was relatively straightforward in Athens, especially for husbands.
Easier for the man, again.
Much easier. A husband could divorce his wife without giving any reason at all. He just had to return the dowry her family gave.
Just return the dowry and that's it.
Pretty much. Divorce could also happen by mutual agreement. Or the wife could initiate it. But there's a catch.
She needed male help.
Always. She needed her male relatives, her curios, to act for her legally. Her own agency was really limited.
So much harder for a woman if she was unhappy.
Definitely. There's the famous story of Hippolyte, Alcibiades' wife.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
She tried to register for divorce, apparently because he was bringing courtesans into their house. But Alcibiades just went to the magistrate's office, grabbed her publicly, and dragged her home.
He just took her back.
Yeah, and she stayed his wife until she died. It really shows the disparity. Initiating divorce was tough for women, always needing male support.
And what about infidelity, cheating?
Good.
Given the focus on lineage, that must have been serious.
Absolutely. The consequences for adultery were potentially devastating, especially for the woman.
How so?
Technically, a husband could kill his wife if he caught her in the act, though that was probably rare, but he was legally required to divorce her
Required? Why?
to maintain his own citizenship rights.
Mm-hmm.
An adulterous wife tainted the legitimacy of the household.
Wow. And what happened to her?
Severe social disgrace. She was banned from public religious events, state ceremonies, basically her only form of public participation.
Cut off socially and religiously.
Completely. Now, the wronged husband could also go after the adulterer. He could kill him if caught in the act, demand compensation, or even physically assault him, though not kill him later.
So the man faced consequences, too.
Yes. But the woman's life was essentially ruined. As the orator Lysias put it, the law sought to dishonor such women and make their life intolerable.
Make their life intolerable. Very harsh system. You mentioned Phryne earlier, the Hera.
Ah, right, Phryne. The story of her trial is legendary. Her lawyer supposedly bared her breast to the jury, and they acquitted her.
Is that true?
Probably embellished, but the story itself, depicted in art, shows the complicated views on female sexuality and morality, even for non-citizen women like Hebe. It's a glimpse into that complex cultural world.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it's crystal clear that marriage in Athens wasn't just personal. It was the absolute bedrock of society.
Totally. A complex system designed for continuity, family, property, citizenship, with women playing this incredibly crucial but often very constrained role.
It really shaped almost everything about an Athenian woman's life, didn't it?
Profoundly. Ensuring the family and state went on, but within a structure that gave them few individual rights and a very narrow path.
So as we finish this deep dive, a few things really stick out, don't they? The fact that marriage was almost unavoidable for women.
Mm-hmm. That inevitability.
That huge age gap between spouses.
Yeah, the power dynamic.
And the main point being lineage, stability, the state, not the romantic ideals we often focus on today. It feels like a very different world.
It does, and it's really insightful, I think, to compare those deeply ingrained historical practices with how we view marriage, partnership, gender roles today.
Right.
We see ourselves as living in such a different world, and we are, in many ways. But it's still worth reflecting on how societal structures, then and now, shape expectations and put constraints on people.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, that lack of emphasis on romantic love back then, does that really tell us about Athenian priorities?
That's a great question.
And maybe, are there echoes of that more utilitarian view of partnerships still around today? Perhaps in ways we don't always spot.
It's possible.
Or, even though the laws in society have changed so drastically, how might those historical constraints on Athenian women still subtly color our conversations now about gender and partnership?
That's definitely something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.